All right, AI at work. So this is really exciting. So the whole point of this is we're not going to talk about the doom and gloom. We're not going to talk about what works and what doesn't work. We are sitting here in January of 2030, and we're going to look back from 2025. Okay, so just to frame this, this morning you were in your kitchen and you were getting your complete health checkup with you don't have 4 Oura rings and an Apple Watch. Your T-shirt is continuously monitoring you, and it's basically telling you what you need to do for the day. It also told you shouldn't have eaten that 3rd piece of pizza and had 2 scotches last night. But the fact of the matter is that literally it will be much more consumer-oriented. This is something I've been really excited about. I'm a high-risk obstetrician who, through a series of events, have led 2 academic medical centers, most recently Thomas Jefferson University and Jefferson Health in Philadelphia, which was a $10 billion system with 18 hospitals and a health science university. We actually merged with a technology and design university for exactly this reason. In 2020, I met Hemant Taneja, the CEO of General Catalyst, and we wrote a book together called Unhealthcare, a Manifesto for Health Assurance, which basically started with, what if a Silicon Valley entrepreneur and a CEO of an academic medical center had a baby? What would that baby look like? So a lot of what we're going to talk about today in the next 40 minutes is what that baby looks like when humans and AI get together. And I couldn't have a more exciting panel to do this with. We'll start with Laura Adams from NAM, championing the creation of AI codes of conduct for patient safety. She's been known to say, if AI is the new doctor, we need to make sure it took the Hippocratic Oath seriously. We have Jake Leach from Dexcom, who's leading the charge in over-the-counter digital health monitoring. Jake once said, our devices are so smart now they can predict your health issues before you even think about getting sick, which is both amazing and terrifying. We have Bryce Chalamel from Moderna, who's really pushing the boundaries of what's possible in personalized medicine. Yes, personalized medicine, not RNA vaccines. Bryce loves to remind us that in 2025, we thought personalized medicine meant remembering your patient's name. Now our AI knows your genome better than you know your own phone number. And Dr. Anthony Chang, Chief Intelligence and Innovation Officer, Children's Hospital of Orange County, who has not just transformed pediatric care, he's redefined it. He's the founder of AI Med and a pioneer of what he calls intelligence-based medicine. Dr. Chang has been teaching AI to speak pediatrician since before most of us thought AI could do more than play chess. So what you've heard a lot of is like why healthcare hasn't changed more rapidly. At a previous panel, I gave this quote from Jason Kidd, who was an NBA player, and he went to the Dallas Mavericks. They were 24 and 52. He said, I'm gonna turn this team around 360 degrees. I've been giving talks like this for 40 years, and it has been like turning things around 360 degrees, but it's all changing now. So let's start with you, Laura. A lot of people talk about kicking that field goal of AI and safety, and that's literally what you've done your whole career. So how are you going to make sure that some of the unintended consequences that happened with things like social media don't happen with AI in health?
Yeah, I think that when we think about the fact that in 2030, it'll be 30 years since the seminal Institute of Medicine report to Err is Human came out, I think we have made not nearly the progress that we had hoped. We haven't come anywhere close to the vision of improving safety for patients. And when I think about the AI-enabled patient safety era that we're entering into and have since 2025, in the past 5 years, I think about the biggest advances are where patients have become more and more strong as partners, that they come in with more knowledge about their own health, their situations. They come in with more digitized self information and advantages. And we also understand that we're going to introduce consequences here. But what I'm excited about in 2030 is to see how many applications we have where AI watches AI. Because when I hear about clinicians having to be vigilant about watching for drift or watching so that it doesn't cause harm, I think back to how ineffective and impotent that was for patient safety when we talked about human vigilance. All you have to do is understand human factors to know that we slip, we get distracted, we do other things. So the idea that we're going to have clinicians constantly watching the AI to make sure it doesn't make a mistake, to me was sort of a horror story. And I think they're going to, if we depend on that, we're going to have the next festival of waste. So I'd really like to see us think in this next upcoming years about the idea of how AI can be enabled to be the watcher and become a true partner in and of itself for AI. And believe me, patients are coming in much more informed about their diagnoses, which I think will be a major, major advantage.
So, it hits me that, we've gone from doctors being captain of the ship. Now, it took us about 50 years to get doctors and nurses to work together. Now we're going to have to get doctors and robots together. We'll have centers for intersentient education. Bryce, it's 2030, and I think, I'm going to make the assumption that one of the biggest changes is, right now, a doctor goes to me and says, Steve, I think given a lot of people like you, this is probably the amount of statin you should be on or what you should take for your cancer. I'm going to assume that things have changed incredibly thanks to some of the work that Moderna and others are doing.
Well, thank you. And yeah, it's interesting that we are known for now as Moderna, well, we were known back in 2025 for a product that achieved billions of units, which was the COVID vaccine, and that one of our greatest achievements 5 years later is personalized treatments for cancer or other type of pathogens. And what we're trying to achieve is to target through mRNA production the immune system towards things that are very specific to you. And we want to either improve or subtract, so improve if you're not producing the right enzyme, or subtract if you have a cancer tumor and it has a specific signature that we can track and get all over your body in case it metastasized and it started spreading in your body, which today is, very bad news for you. Back in 2025 was a very bad news for you, and not can be treated. And I want to double down on what was just said, because I think that in these personalized medicine journeys, you're going to have also to be a voice. You are going to be empowered by knowing yourself, knowing your condition, your past, your vitals. I notice you have an Oura ring around your finger. I have a Whoop band. I think almost everyone here is somehow tracking their vitals. And we are more and more becoming our own nurses. And then our nurses have become our doctors. Have you noticed? Like, I have a doctor, I know his face because it's on the website of the hospital, but I've never really met him. And I think he's doing research, which is interesting because our researchers are on fire, right? Like they are doing, discovery of brand new ways of doing physics. And the way that AI is empowering every one of us to go a little bit further than we used to, and also to understand the diversity of the other people around us in the ecosystem, is going to help us complement the individualized therapy that are, of course, themselves out of a lot of machine learning adapted to understand how can I code the exact mRNA for the exact protein for your immune system. So a lot of machine learning there. But Gen AI on the side to support the patient, the doctor, the nurses, to make sense of that therapy, to bring it home to you in a way that is more humane. So I think is of the essence. And my last word on that one will be that paradoxically in 2030, we have a more humane medicine thanks to AI, right? Because now we have bots to speak to, data to rely on, time to think about it, and it has become a fairer and more pleasant system to work with for personalized therapies.
Yeah, and I think that's great. And I think, one of the things, some critics have said AI is just going to make the wealthy healthier. But I think given what you're saying with personalized medicine, I know one of the companies I'm working with called Paradigm is using AI to democratize clinical trials, which is really, frankly, stuck in the 90s as to how we do it. But if I'm wealthy, I might be able to fly out to Houston or New York. And that's not because my doctor in Florida isn't good, but he just doesn't, or she doesn't have the infrastructure. The ability to use AI and match people is going to revolutionize that. Jake, what hits me sometimes is that when we talk about AI and we talk about robots, drones, and all the SaaS stuff, sensors sometimes get not as talked about as much, but that's, to me, going to be the thing that really makes the difference. That my car gets better care than I do. I have a car that when I get back to Miami, it's going to say, hey, Steve, while you were playing around in Las Vegas, my right front passenger tire got a little low. Could you please fill it up? Because it sends 24/7 signals. I'm going to go and have my physical 2 weeks from now in Philadelphia, and somebody's going to tell me, based on today, your blood pressure, your calcium score, your X and Y, this is what you should do for the next 18 months. So how's Dexcom in 2030 how can I get rid of my Oura Ring and my Apple Watch and my 25 other things? How's that going to change?
No, I think it's a great question. I think having a physical after being in Vegas for a week's probably not a great idea. But no, I think as you said, Stephen, sensors are such an important part of this concept of personalizing medicine because they are the devices that provide the information that AI is going to use to be able to provide you personalized insights. Dexcom, we specialize in a glucose biosensor. One of the big developments lately is now CGM biosensors are available over the counter, so no longer prescription required. You can go to a website and buy it now. Our product's called Stello. And what we've seen is just an amazing uptake in the diabetes space where people are interested in managing their glucose because they have diabetes or prediabetes. We're seeing a lot of people in the health and wellness space who are generally interested in their metabolic health. And a big part of making the most out of these sensors is ensuring that the feedback and the information that you're providing to the user who's wearing the sensor is actionable and personalized. And what we've seen as we've started to introduce Gen AI into our system is that it creates a more engaging experience. You don't have these static reports. You have these reports that change over time. Even the words look different, so you're not getting the same report every week. And I think we're just at the beginning stages, but there's an incredible opportunity to personalize this medicine and allow it to be, better outcomes, and you start to move towards preventative versus treating a chronic disease like diabetes or obesity once it happens. I mean, getting on that curve, bending that curve, it's good for all of us, it's good for the healthcare system and the costs.
I love that you brought up the continuous glucose monitoring because there's probably been more talk about GLP-1s here and who's covering and who's not covering. And, you look at something like CGM and you could look at a future with AI where, if you have a creeping up hemoglobin A1C and you're pre-diabetic and you've got the kind of Dexcom 6s and 7s that you guys have, that literally the AI can be telling you what to do, not necessarily for $1,500 a month.
Exactly. We're there now. It's starting. I think the key is bringing awareness that the technology exists. One of the most frustrating things is there's hundreds of millions of people around the world that have diabetes and they're still pricking their finger because they don't know what a CGM is. This little device you wear in the back of your arm. The outcomes are so much better when you have all the right information. So I think awareness is a big part in bringing awareness that the technology exists and that there's this significant benefit that can be provided.
So Dr. Chang, you've been called a lot of things, but one is the AI whisperer in pediatrics. And
they used to call me Dr. AI until when I Googled Dr. AI, I realized that it's a Persian surname. So there are hundreds of thousands of Dr. AIs out there.
There you go, okay. But look, I mean, the fact that you've taken that on, like most people would say, hey, kids are way, way, way too unpredictable for AI to handle. And they're too unpredictable for humans to handle. So I'm interested in 2030, how has AI really revolutionized pediatric care beyond what we might think today?
Well, I was very inspired by some of the keynotes here at CES. And I'm thinking, drawing your analogy earlier, we have this technology that's on an exponential rise, but we're dealing with healthcare, which has trouble with technology that's on an exponential rise. So I think realistically in 2030, I'm not going to expect a whole lot to be impacted by AI other than a few sectors. And I think, it's going to take healthcare quite some time to adjust the adoption of AI. And I think one of the main issues, I gave this talk a few weeks ago about 10 reasons why AI will not impact healthcare. And it was actually relatively easy to put that talk together, as some of you can imagine. But I think there's some potential obstacles that if we can overcome, and it's going to take everyone in this room and the population around the world to be able to really neutralize these obstacles. One is, get healthcare data and databases much better organized. And I think I deal with that every single day in the hospital. And I'm at a hospital that's considered one of the best ones for database management. We have to change our behavior. We have to change our expectations. $4.4 trillion, probably will reach $5 trillion by the end of this year, of healthcare expenditure, and we had one of the worst outcomes of all the developing countries. And I know what happened in New York was tragic, but I think that's only the beginning of a clarion call for a much better health system with much better dividends. And it's going to take everybody to get that done. So I think on the AI side, it's very exciting that we are now going from the computational intelligence era, as I call it, in terms of deep learning, and we're very quickly going into what I call the cognitive intelligence era, which is using elements like reinforcement learning, which Jensen Huang talked about as part of this AI portfolio. And yet, I feel like we have a Formula One car that's being built, and we have a track that is full of chicanes, which are these 180-degree turns that intentionally slow cars down. So until we get rid of those chicanes, that being how healthcare is organized, how data is organized and kept, how we potentially need to change our behavior. Behavior is something that AI will not change, or will find very difficult to change. So let's get those obstacles out of the way. Then I think we'll have a straightaway period in which we'll really reap the benefit of a lot of what AI is capable of doing. But I'm cautiously hopeful that AI will actually be the final sort of paradigm shift that we need in healthcare to really steer the ship correctly.
Yeah, and I think you bring up such a good point. In the book by Narayanan, AI Snake Oil, he talks about two things. One is that where AI has failed in predictive analytics is predicting future human behavior, because humans can't predict what they're going to do tomorrow, let alone the AI. But the second thing is it also assumes a rational model and the right, basically the right incentives, which we don't have, at least in the American healthcare system, right? So, I want to get into that a little bit so if we knew back when, Mark Zuckerberg and the team were doing things like Facebook and that kind of thing, that it wasn't only so I could see my unbelievably cute grandkids in Providence, but could affect elections and, potentially hate, we might have put some guardrails in at the beginning. So I want to talk about, and this goes to what you've all said. How do we kick the field goal between allowing AI to thrive and do all the amazing things that you've said, and not get caught up where we're having Senate hearings with, frankly, 80-year-olds that can't even get on the technology, trying to say, boy, this is what we should have done 10 years ago?
Well, you had asked me earlier about what I do in clinic day to day now with all the large language models, and I use a combination of, I'm just curious, how many are clinicians here in this audience? Okay, too few, in my opinion, for this talk and this panel. But between open evidence, which is available, and even GPT-01, I think I'm a better clinician, even though I've been doing pediatric cardiology for 40 years. And it's not just being even more certain about things, but it's also taking on problems that may not be directly cardiac in origin, so that I can help with the overall healthcare of that particular family. So I think, and I predicted this 5 years ago, that by the end of this decade, you will be sued for malpractice, and I know that shouldn't be the driver, but unfortunately in this case it's the stick. You will be sued for malpractice for not using a portfolio of AI tools that are available and people are using.
Yeah, and Laura, Bryce, and Jake, I'd love to hear from you.
I think we're in the middle of integrating AI and generative AI technology into our products, and we're taking a kind of a stepwise approach. I think one of the things we've recognized is to really get it right, you got to learn and iterate. You got to use the technology. You got to get it out there. So you just get it out there with appropriate guardrails. We're a regulated medical device, so we work with the FDA. Worked really well on a framework of how to control or how to ensure that the product's safe and effective. It's very similar to back about 10 years ago when we first integrated medical devices with smartphones. There was a lot of concern about the control of software on smartphones. And so we developed frameworks to ensure that there was safe and effective implementations. And so we did something very similar with our AI technologies. And I think the key with medicine and healthcare is so much of it is information, getting the right information to people that is personalized and timely. And so it is important that we're not allowing the system to provide inaccurate or misinformation. But I do believe, based on our experience so far, is that if we put the right guardrails on it, and we start slow and continue to evolve and learn, we really are going to be able to see the power and get the optimum potential for this.
I think the guardrails that we are looking at now, look at in 2025, have to do with pre-market. It feels to me like we need to do something that we've never done very well in healthcare and in medicine, and that's understand whether what we do works and what we do in the clinical setting. We have so much of our performance and work that we do in the clinical setting that doesn't have a basis in science. So the only way we learn about it is to understand its impact in the real world. So it feels to me this is an all teach, all learn moment where we need really strong emphasis on understanding and sharing the results of how these things perform, under what conditions, under what context, and begin to share that learning openly, not with the idea of a punitive effect, but the idea of improvement. There's a whole big difference between observing and measuring for improvement and measuring for sort of sorting the bluebirds from the crows or whatever, and making sure that we've got the good and the bad sorted out. So I think that all teach, all learn guardrail should be one that we should emphasize strongly in the future.
I want to go back to your question and pause for a second, because what are we guarding against? The problems that were met by social networks, they are not the ones that are going to be met by artificial intelligence. This is a whole new era with new sets of technologies and challenges. And I think one of the biggest threats that we have is misunderstanding of the technology. And I want to put it in simple terms. There's this and that type of software. And this type of software is the one we're used to. You give it instructions, it gives you an outcome, and if you do this 1,000,000 times over, you get 1,000,000 times over the same outcome. And then there's that type of software. You give it instructions, gives you an outcome, give it another instruction, gives you another outcome. And you can give it 1,000,000 times the instructions, it's going to give you 1,000,000 different outcomes. And that's AI in the way that we're experiencing it right now through generation AI. And so it baffles people that AI cannot do mid-level math. Why? Because they are so used to this kind of software that knows how to do math that they can't understand that that kind of software doesn't do math. But actually that kind of software guesses the answer. So you can guess 2 and 2, everyone guesses this is 4, but you can't guess 1,255 multiplied by 2,376, right? Like you can't guess it, you have to actually do the math. And so there's a lot of solutions for it. You can generate a Python script that's going to do the math. You can run models like O1 or O3 that are going to deconstruct the reasoning and get you the right answer through a series of steps in reasoning patterns. We're not out of answers, but I don't know that we have the culture today to understand the way that that software works. And it's a double threat for us. First, because it might give you the wrong impression that it's bad, that it can't even do mid-level math. So that's how bad it is. And you might stay with that impression, just cast a dark shadow on it, forget it in the back of your drawer, and never trust it again, and you're wrong. But you could also over-rely on it, have some actual calculation to do, think that's going to guess the math, and be surprised that it didn't, but too late, and don't understand what you're working with. So I think the number one guardrail is to create mass effect and mass culture around it. We've taken too long to do this with mobile phones and social networks, and I think that's the problem. It took us a decade to understand the consequences of putting smartphones in the hands of teenagers and providing them into social networks, and now we're adapting to it, but there's a whole decade of teenagers who didn't benefit from our wisdom. And I wish we wouldn't do the same mistake twice, and this time accelerate the pace at which we distribute it, accelerate the scale at which we enable it. Stop thinking about ROI. This is utility, like electricity or computing or internet. Just give it to everyone, create safety for their data, create conditions for usage, user policies, make sure that you have incident management, and then let them learn the tool and the culture that goes with the tool and how they feel safe and empowered with it.
Yeah,
right? That would be the guardrail for me.
I think that's such an important point of starting to use these things for the things that we want to project. One of the smartest cabinet choices I made for my 18 hospital system was a CMSMIO, a Chief Medical Social Media Information Officer. His name was Austin Chang. He was a TikTok darling, about 2 million hits. He was probably our #1 driver for people getting vaccines. We were doing all these 30-second commercials with Independence Blue Cross. No 25-year-old was watching that. But he was doing jumping jacks, like literally the day after he got his vaccine, where people were saying, oh, this is going to have you be, really sick for a week. So I think we didn't do a good enough job of, instead of saying, don't listen to TikTok, saying, hey, how can we use those things?
I think one of the points that Jensen mentioned on Monday in terms of things, I know he mentioned lots of toys that would be available, was the concept of having a digital twin for every factory. You may remember hearing that. I think we all have a digital twin for every individual for their health. And I think we're not far from that. I'm just afraid that if we don't invest enough and be over-regulated to the point where we're going to stifle innovation, that's what I'm afraid of. When Jesse Ehrenfeld, who's a good friend of mine, who was the outgoing AMA president, said, you're into AI for a long time, for a few decades. What keeps you up at night? What keeps me up at night is not worrying about what AI is going to do on the harm side, but not using AI enough to help all the people out there with conditions, especially rare conditions. And I think, look around the room, 2 to 3 of us will end up getting cancer and or heart disease. And yet we don't have a really good precision care map to take care of all of us. So if we have a digital twin, then you will actually know how to best treat yourself, because your doctor will be able to not rely on published randomized controlled trials, which should not be, I'm not saying we should obviate those, but we should absolutely change our paradigm in terms of figuring out what to do best for our health.
Yeah, and I think, part of the problem is, and this is what I want to get into next, because we're at the Consumer Electronics Show, I want to talk about the consumers and the humans in the middle when online meets offline, how we have to change. Because it hits me, even with things like integrative health. We had done a survey, I think the same will be true with AI. We asked obstetricians, how many of your patients do you think have seen an integrative health provider? An alternative health provider. I said, oh, my patients wouldn't do that. I'd say 5-6%. We had the ability to talk to the patients, and it was something like 62%. And when we went back and said, how could there be that difference to the patients? Because the last person I talked to about going to an integrative health provider would be my doctor, because he or she's going to knee-jerk that all these are bad. And I think we're going to see some of that in AI if we haven't been trained in it by definition. So I want to talk about the consumer. I want to talk about the consumer because doctors are consumers are consumers, patients are consumers, companies are consumers. But there's 2 or 3 areas that I'd love to have you folks explore. One is, it used to be, consumers are going to be armed with this stuff now, right? So it used to be, as we were talking about before, if a patient would come to me and I told them they had lupus and pregnancy, and 10 years ago they came with 10 pages from Google, I could just reflexly say that's ridiculous. Now they're going to come with a ChatGPT thing, and if I say it's ridiculous, they're going to say, so I guess you disagree with the chair of OB at University of California, San Francisco, that yesterday wrote this article for New England Journal of Medicine and said I was right. So, how do we deal with that? How do we get patients the right information? And the second piece, just real quickly, is how do we change the people that are running the system so that we know that they're up to speed on these things?
Yeah, I would like to posit something for the first part. At Moderna now, we have 100% adoption on all knowledge workers of AI, and it's been going on for almost a year and a half now at that level. So we see things out of day-to-day habits. And what I see first is that everyone is a team of 5, and I would think it's going to be the same with patients. Themselves, an expert, and that's the one you just mentioned, right? Like the access to expertise. A coach who can look back at conversations, at interactions, at behaviors, and then give you feedback and say, oh, I would have taken that drug as the doctor prescribed, which you haven't, right? A coach. A creative partner, right? That helps you think differently about things that you haven't solved so far. Maybe ideate about all right, I didn't behave the right way because I went to sleep too late, I didn't take my pills. How could I change this? And let's have a conversation. And an assistant, write all this for me in a 5-page document and draft out the next steps and ship it to my doctor and to my wife, right? So everyone is about to turn into a team of 5. Themselves, the expert, the coach, the creative partner, the assistant. And that new team of patients has to be taken into account now and accepted by the system. And I think that's the challenge ahead of us.
I think the system doesn't have a choice but to understand that AI is a revolution in cheap expertise. It is an unbelievable democratization of information in the hands of patients that they have never had before. You Google something in the past, you had to go through X number of websites, try to knit all these things together. Watch a mother with a child who was in intractable pain and almost paralysis of his lower extremities and had been so for about 3 years while she took him to 17 different doctors trying to get a diagnosis. She finally, out of exasperation, loaded up his record into ChatGPT, and it came out not with a recommendation that said it's this. It said you might consider these things. At the top of that list was tethered cord, where that child's spinal cord was abnormally fused to a component in the body where when that child started to grow, it stretched the cord and almost ended up with that child with paralysis. And once she got that reading, then she went back to the organized delivery system, went to a doctor that would listen to her because several wouldn't. And she went to that physician. That physician within 2 weeks had that child in the surgery suite, and that child was running up and down on the stage where we were presenting that day, disrupting and crawling all over chairs, much to our delight. And I think that we ignore this at our peril. We want to, I think, in the organized delivery system, compare the use of AI to perfection. They're comparing it to the use, to the idea of what they get now. And I think we should all take a deep breath, because what they get now is far from perfection.
And I think there's several injustices in healthcare, and you and I talked about this earlier. One is not distributing expertise to everyone. And I think hopefully AI will be the equalizer we finally need. I'm tired of looking at rankings of hospitals, whatever that means, and not make that level of expertise available for everyone. How would you feel if you're a parent and you're somewhere in the country where the local children's hospital is ranked 82nd? How would you feel taking your child to get care there, even though hopefully with AI in the future, everyone will be getting the same level of care as the #1 children's hospital? And again, whatever that means. So AI can absolutely be the equalizer. Not to mention, I think physicians don't always make a correct diagnosis, and probably more often than you think. And AI hopefully will also be the equalizer in the individual patient to the physician interaction, so that you maximize the good. And you talked about our manpower needs. We're going to be 100,000 physicians short by the end of the decade. So where's that going to come from? That's going to come from your physician assistant and associates, which they prefer to be called now, your nurse practitioners, and everyone else, I think, armed with AI to make the correct diagnosis at the right time.
I think part of that too is, if we empower the consumers and the patients to engage in their health. I've been working in continuous glucose monitoring technology for decades, and I can't tell you how many times when we first started out, the physicians would say, what are these patients going to do with all this data? They're not going to know how to manage their diabetes. And the outcomes were very, very clear when we started putting the technology on people. They figured it out pretty quick. It was pretty intuitive. And so I think the more we can do that, you think about all the chronic diseases, diabetes, obesity, liver, kidney disease, there's so much of that can be changed by different lifestyle habits. And if we can use technology to empower people to, make healthier choices and then reinforce that healthy habit, it'll be incredible what we can do, but it's on us to make sure we get the technology, we make it accessible, and we make it easy to use.
So, I want to put it out there that I don't think any of the 5 of us are going to be what causes that change. I think it's the 200 people out there. So the question for you don't have to answer it, but is when are you going to have your I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore moment as a consumer in healthcare now that these technologies are available? And I'll just give you one example. We started when I was at University of South Florida, which, by the way, is in Northwest Florida, which tells you everything you need to know about the logic of academics in Florida. But we started the largest simulation center with a simple thing that I recognize. I'm a pilot, and every 2 years I have to get my technical competence assessed. As a surgeon, for 35 years, nobody's ever checked my technical competence. The issue is not the technology. Back when we started it, the technology, but now we could tell if I'm 71 years old, if a 71-year-old surgeon has had a couple of bad cases, we can bring them to a simulation center, just like pilots do. If I'm Steve the pilot, and I have one bumpy landing, I get, hey, and I'm at United, you're spending the weekend in Denver, and if I'm within a mean and a standard deviation, I'm flying on Monday. If I'm not, I'm getting neurologic testing, toxicology testing, et cetera. So part of the question I want to put out there is, why has it taken so long for these folks, who are all to blame, to really start to force us into doing some of the things that we know the technology can do?
We mentioned earlier that you had a question about when do we understand that AI does more than chess. And I think we are very blessed to have 25 years now of experience with AI doing chess and seeing what happened. Because the end is the beginning. When Garry Kasparov was beat by Deep Blue, everyone said it's the end of chess. But since then, there are, I think, 15 times more licensed chess players in America. Chess has become a society phenomenon. The grandmasters are 2,000. There were 180 grandmasters in 1990. Now there are 2,000 grandmasters. When Magnus Carlsen was a grandmaster in 2004, he was 13 years old, the second youngest ever. Now there are 10 younger grandmasters than him, who became grandmasters younger. And the whole world of chess is on fire. Chess has made more progress in 20 years than in thousands of years before. And it is because expertise has become irrelevant. The models knows no one who plays chess is going to challenge Stockfish on a move. If Stockfish says the move is wrong, period. Even Magnus Carlsen knows this. And I think that on the other end of the spectrum, doctors dealing with complex systems with human patients, they're not behaving like chess players, right? And neither are the patients. They think expertise still matters. And as we go into the dilution of expertise into a more chess-like world for healthcare, the end is the beginning. The end of the constraints of expertise is the beginning of us being 15 times more powerful and more numerous, having better ELO ratings, and making progress in medicine, the likes of which in 20 years hasn't been seen in thousands. So I want to leave on that note of hope that you trust the models increasingly, watch them, trust them, learn them, and let's make sure that doctors and patients become good chess players, rely on the model and grow. Right?
I think there's a duality here. One is, as you know, you and I have been in medicine for almost 40 years or more. It's been asymmetric for a very long time. And because of asymmetry of information, hopefully that's being neutralized. On the other hand, the other end of the spectrum is that the healthcare system is much more complex than most people probably realize. And I look at clinicians as Sherpas helping you climb Mount Everest, because sometimes it does feel like it's that difficult to navigate the health system. So what I think we really need also in the middle of all of this is training of clinician cohorts that can be bilingual. Understand enough AI to help use AI as a resource to navigate the healthcare system, because talking to a lot of startups and a lot of medical students who graduated, particularly in Silicon Valley, and now are being recruited in startups, and it pains me how much resources are being wasted because they're solving the wrong problems. Right. Or solving problems with a solution that's not good enough.
They have a technology that doesn't really have a problem.
Yeah. My take is that you've already started. You haven't reached sort of that mad as hell moment, but it's been a gradual onset, and we're about to reach the tipping point, because we are frustrated to the max with the system, and we're also now being enabled with tools the likes of which we've never had before, that cheap expertise that we've never had access to before, that ability to have it consolidated and speak to us in a language, literally any language, any reading level, any context that you want, that ability to communicate with it in such a way that it returns usable and actionable information back to us. I feel like this revolution is already well underway, and I do think it's very shortly to the tipping point where we'll start to see that massive change.
10 seconds.
I'm just going to say I'm optimistic. I agree with Laura. I think we're right on the cusp. I haven't seen as much disruption in consumer health as in the last couple of years. There's significant disruption occurring, and as you start to bring in technologies like AI, I think I'm optimistic that things are going to start moving faster. Never fast enough, but
I think
faster.
the best 25 years in healthcare.
Okay, so
about to happen.
I'll leave you with an optimistic piece. I did a video where I came back from 2035 as a hologram because I'm now the president, I'm now the Chief Digital Health Officer for President Taylor Swift, because the Swifties have become a party. We could do worse. And their healthcare motto is make it tailored to the individual and make it swift. And I am pretty convinced that we will be there. Thank you all very much. Really appreciate it.